everyone, I'm Emily and I'm the curator of prints and drawings at the CMA. It's good to be with you today. And I want to talk to you about two watercolors by the American modernist painter John Marin. John Marin is widely considered the most innovative practitioner of watercolor working in America in the early 20th century. And it's appropriate to talk about his works while sitting outdoors because his primary subject matter was the landscape, and he primarily liked to work out of doors. His watercolors really transport us to the spot on which he sat while he was painting, but they also transport us to the experience that he had while he was painting. These two watercolors come to the museum this year as part of the transformative gift of works of art from the collection of Nancy and Joseph Keithley. Let's take a look.
Born in Rutherford, New Jersey in 1870, John Marin trained as a painter at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in 1900 and 1901. Here he is shown on the far right of the photograph at the Academy, surrounded by the plaster casts of works from antiquity from which students often sketched. The Academy did not teach painting in the watercolor medium, as it was not yet considered a serious medium for the academic artist. Always one to rebel against norms, Marin taught himself to paint with watercolors. He took to it immediately, perhaps because it suited his affinity for experimentation, and watercolor would become a defining feature of his artistic practice. It also suited his preference for working outdoors in nature. Marin made these two watercolors in 1914 when he and his wife spent their first summer on the coast of Maine. Both feature the landscape near their cottage on West Point. It was typical for Marin to paint in the same place repeatedly, and he wrote that doing so allowed him to move away from the literal representation of a place to communicate things, quote, seen and felt. In both, we are transported to the very spot on which Marin sat to paint. The vantage point of the first watercolor, perhaps painted in the early summer, may suggest that Marin was perched on the limb of a pine tree, something that he was well known to do. The variety of fir trees that punctuate Maine's coast clearly delighted him, and through the years they operated like talismans in his work, perhaps representing steadfastness in a world full of constant change. He composed the trees here with layers of paint, applied wet in vibrant combinations, bright royal blue over forest green, or purple over olive green. Marin's interest in textural effects is evident on the far rock face, where he worked more precisely using a dry brush. Marin understood implicitly how watercolor behaves, but also embraced the medium's unpredictability. The pink wash in the water and sky here, suggesting dusk, was evidently applied after the primary landscape features had been completed. This in itself was a break from traditional methods of watercolor, in which the artist would have generally applied overall washes to the sheet of paper, defining areas such as water or sky, before adding landscape features. In some places here, the pink paint pools in between the trees, while in the center of the composition, Marin blotted it out, causing the still wet trees underneath to blur and create a hazy effect. The variety of marks, combined with the colors Marin chose, convey the movement and energy of the landscape, but also, to me, the intensity and physicality of Marin's active painting. Marin also created tension throughout the composition between representation and abstraction, with some landscape elements clearly delineated and others mere washes of paint. I love the animated purplish mist that wafts through the underbrush, but I'm not sure if it references anything in nature. Perhaps it is meant to suggest the movement of the breeze, or it could be an experimental framing device for the scene. Marin often painted internal frames in his pictures in order to emphasize their status as paintings rather than windows into nature. Marin returned to the same location in this watercolor he made in the fall later that same year. We're further down the slope now, or perhaps on the ground rather than in a tree, looking straight out toward a group of evergreens. The pinks, oranges, and reds of autumn gather in a sinuous soup of color that is also defined by the areas of the sheet of paper that Marin left blank or white. Again, the variety of marks, from wet washes to the more precise lines that delineate some branches, draw attention to Marin's act of creation. Here, in a more deliberate way, Marin created an internal framing device disguised as foliage in cooler tones at the lower left and right, signaling that we are looking at a picture composed of Marin's personal experience of nature rather than nature itself. When Marin exhibited his Maine watercolors in New York, critics said that he had liberated the medium of watercolor, and in that phrase they captured the freedom that Marin described feeling when working outdoors, which I think is conveyed to us as viewers very much today.
You can see these works on our website at cma.org. While you're there, be sure to check out the 4 other watercolors by John Marin that came to the museum this year as part of the Keithley gift. One of those was painted the same year and in the same location. Well, we can't wait to see you back at the museum. In the meantime, I hope you can experience your own nature, whether it be a potted plant, your backyard, or the park down the street. Be well, everyone, and goodbye.
Support the CMA Fund. Help us create transformative experiences through art for the benefit of all the people forever. Thank you.